Okay, so this is the package team's retrospective for the 12.3 milestone. And we're just going to kick this off. As linked in the doc, we actually have a board now that shows our missed deliverables based on the milestone that were missed from. I'm really only focusing on the 12.3 missed deliverables this time around. There are some older missed deliverables. I think I'm just going to leave them alone because they'll be reprioritized so that this is purely focused on 12.3. The agenda document that we have here actually shows the items that we missed, and there's also a basic introduction to the process as I sort of think it might work. And again, happy to just make changes as people feel it will be helpful. What we're going to do is walk through the items we missed, and then there's some action items and improvements to the process. And I don't feel like I should necessarily be driving all of this because the people who actually had those missed deliverables can speak more appropriately to what happened and why. But I think this is going to be helpful in terms of us identifying areas where we just have some processes not working well. So to kick this off, the first one is Steve, I believe.
Yep. So this is all with relationship to Conan. And so the root cause of the Conan miss is really just like not taking the time to properly understand the scope of implementing like a completely new and unknown package manager. And also along with that, sort of not understanding the time it would take to understand sort of the intricacies of what our current implementations do, such as like the group versus instance versus project level endpoints, and not necessarily really like grokking that in a way that would help with the implementation. So when was it the potential miscommunicated? So I communicated it maybe a little over a week before the release date. But in reality, I think I had sort of like the sense of, like this doesn't feel like it might get done since like the day the milestone began. It was kind of like this seems like a lot. I don't know if I can actually do it. And so what did I learn from that? I certainly can't expect other people to know that that's what I'm thinking. So I should speak up my concerns as soon as I have any, just to make everyone aware, and we can make decisions based off of that. It looks like I have a couple Conan issues here. I mean, they're all of the other Conan issues were kind of sub-issues of this one main issue. So I'll kind of default back to that. The only other point I had was like one of the sub-issues ended up being a large or 5 in itself. And so that's just another sort of like byproduct of not having really taken the time ahead of time to understand what the different pieces were that I was going to be digging into. All right, over to Ian.
Yeah, so the next one that we have on the list is identifying data required for the redesign. There's kind of 2 things going on here. So one, the survey did miss 12.3. I was pretty transparent about it as it happens. First, we had a delay in being able to publish it, and then we had a delay getting enough respondents to really make the data valuable. But that just kind of ended up making it past the milestone. Research tends to be a little bit hazier, but I am going to try to keep it inside of milestones. The other aspect of this that Tim and I kind of need to iron out, I think, is how we are tracking the validation and research efforts. There is, and I've shared before, a research issue in the UX research project that we use as the design team to kind of track all of our research efforts across the board. And that doesn't quite line up with the issues and the boards that we're using inside of package to kind of manage ourselves. And I think because of that, Tim and I kind of missed tracking that. So we need to figure out a good way to align that. Does that sound right, Tim?
I think so. I think I'm still using mainly for myself the package planning board, even though we have a workflow label board that I'm using the labels. I just don't think that we've been reviewing it regularly. I think I've just been reviewing just the planning board. So I think that could be improved, probably.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think, sorry, did you have other thoughts, Ian?
Nope.
Cool. Yeah, so I think if something, because your comment here was sort of went through 2 milestones, I guess I wonder whether we consider that actually a missed deliverable if it just through unexpected efforts, you know, external stuff, problems publishing. And I think I remember there's some technical issues when we're trying to use that product as well. So with the stuff like that, that feels to me like a situation where you would move it from one milestone to the next because it's sort of out of your control. I don't know if that counts as a missed deliverable in the context of like, here's the work we're trying to deliver. We didn't get it done in spite of everything being in line otherwise, right?
Yeah, so for this, I wanted to get the survey done in 12.3, and so that's why I thought it was kind of missed. Again, kind of clearly laid out why it was missed. The bigger thing about Tim and I taking 2 milestones to really validate and research why the data is, that's probably something that doesn't count as a missed deliverable. I wasn't sure which one I was representing here, so I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good call out. Definitely suggest putting ideas of how we might avoid this in future in the document here, and then we can maybe create issues around that. But thank you. The next one was create package metadata table to support package tags and additional attributes. This is a community contribution. So as such, I think it's difficult to predict when these efforts will actually appear in a milestone and be completed. We can't, you obviously can't account for someone who's using their own personal time to do work on a project. And I've called this out a few times. I think it's nice to sort of say, hey, you know, we'd like to have this in X milestone. But I think the reality is everything is against that being predictable just because of the nature of community contributions. Because as I said, people are just giving their own personal time to this, and that will fluctuate quite a bit. So in as much as, you know, I've been following the work here, as well as the work, one of the other community contributions we have, Composer. This stuff just takes longer and way longer. So I wonder whether it's probably better that we don't put community contributions into our milestones. That would kind of be my feedback. So I'll add that to the document. But Tim, you're welcome to comment to that, or anyone else if they feel like they have thoughts that are valuable here. And you don't have to. I'm not trying to call anyone out. And we can move on to the next one, but I think that's a sort of part of the Conan effort. And so the last one, or second last one I should say is from Gigi. Did you want to speak to the other Conan issue, Steve? Are you good?
No, I think it falls in with what was already said.
Cool. Okay, so collect consumption measures for DevOps package was the issue that got missed here. What was the root cause of the miss? Gigi says probably a lack of proper prioritization on my part due to other issues being worked on, other Docker related issues. When was it communicated? He said it didn't. I don't think it has been communicated. What can be learnt? He said, I believe I have to be more strategic with merge reviews and don't rely on daily cycles of putting in review and checking back the next day. Getting reviews in the same day saves a lot of time and doesn't let the issues span across several days and eventually lose focus due to other issues being worked on. So I'm not sure what the findings from that would be. I think, you know, I know Gigi and I have been talking about where to check priorities, and I'll stop swaying, sorry. It's probably really awkward to watch. So, you know, and this could be, I could look at this and see this is partly my responsibility as well, because Gigi's, you know, in the earlier stages of being part of the team. So, you know, maybe it's worth following up. I then, as a manager, I tend to lean away from like checking in on everyone's individual work. I don't like to do that. But sometimes if someone needs help, that sort of just sets them up to fail because, you know, you don't have their back on some of these things. So maybe I could contribute a bit more in that area. Happy to hear if people do or do not want that type of assistance. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of it, but if it's helpful, then I'm good to do whatever is helpful here. Cool. And 7, Nick, I think you have a comment here.
Yeah, this is mine. So mine isn't related to a missed deliverable, but maybe it should have been a missed deliverable. So I've put 12.4, but this also happened in 12.3, where I was taking issues that were they appeared to be front end, but when you look at them, they actually turn out to be mostly back end work. And then I've still been taking those on, and I've done a couple of those now, where I've implemented the back end side of things. Now, I probably shouldn't have done that. I should have actually called this out and said, hang on a sec, these are back end tasks. They require much more Ruby code than JavaScript, and therefore I'm not the right person to be doing these. And I should have called this out, and they should have become like, they should have either been prioritized or become misdeliverables, essentially. So I guess I need to go out and dig out the 12.3 issues, but this will probably come up in 12.4 as well, where like basically essentially all of my issues have been backend in 12.4. So yeah, basically the action item there for me is that I'm now going to start working behind feature flags, and if there's any backend element whatsoever, I'm just going to call it out, and then if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done.
Sorry. So recently we had a merge to the handbook, and I'm just going to find this. The merge to the handbook is in handbooks /engineering/workflow, and it speaks to delivering independently between FE, front end and back end. And what it is, it's prioritizing feature flags in this scenario. So it's worth identifying whether we consider this a failure of estimation in terms of, hey, we tried to estimate these things and we took a quick look at it. And again, this is prioritizing very little energy on estimation. So if this is a good case to maybe do a little bit of a deeper like poke at these issues, that might be worthwhile, particularly on the front end, to identify that whether there's a back end requirement. I'm going to grab that link here and share it if I can spell engineering correctly. There we go. So I think there's 2 points to that, right? Like if we find ourselves in a position where we have a backend work that's required, then it's identifying that. The way to work around it is maybe not so much to, just for context, Nick and I chatted about this morning because we had our one-on-one catch up. So we've already talked about this a bit, so it might feel a little harsh, but this is already a conversation we've had. It's probably better rather than having a senior front-end engineer try to hack their way through. And I'm not suggesting you hack, by the way, Nick, because you're obviously an excellent engineer, so excuse that terminology. But try to work their way through, some back-end code where they don't have that expertise. That effort to create some solution that works probably feels way worse than just sort of, okay, I'm feature flagging this. My work won't be complete, but it does require back-end work. So that's probably a better overall outcome. And it does then speak to us having a breakdown in the process of identifying what work is required for a particular issue. I will link to this now, and I think we can move on. Steve, I think you had some action items here if you want to speak to those.
Yeah, and some of this might just be kind of almost discussion items. But so first, I mean, my one takeaway is, and we've kind of already discussed this, is that when it comes to implementing a new package manager, before we sort of schedule the actual implementation in a milestone, we should always schedule an investigation issue in a preceding milestone at some point, so that we can take the time to understand the proper scope of each one. And one thought I kind of had on that is that because these are sort of large, one alternative route we could take is to decide to not spend time on the investigation, but sort of just accept that we don't know how long it might take, and not schedule like when it's going to be complete or announce when it's going to be complete. I don't know if that's even really an option, but it's just a thought that kind of crossed my head. And so that sort of fits in more generally with my question of like, so how should we look at issues that may take more than one milestone to implement in general? And when it comes to an issue that is a large weight or 5, my action item there is that there should always, like if one of those shows up on a given milestone, there should be a discussion as to what that means and whether or not we can confidently estimate the effort involved and what actions to take about that.
If we had done the Conan investigation up front, like let's say 12.2 was a milestone of investigation, and you know what you know now, would we have built it any differently? Would we have planned the work out differently?
I don't know if we would have necessarily like planned it out differently, but it would have been more of a like, this is going to take 2 months to implement. Like I can tell. or something, to that extent, rather than like kind of looking at it and being like, well, I think it doesn't look that different from what we've done before. So I think I could maybe do it in a month. It would be more of a like, oh, there's a lot more to do.
And we were kind of anchor biased into thinking it was 1 or 2 milestones because DZ had told us, yeah, it should be pretty straightforward. And then we were surprised because Conan had poor documentation or it was difficult to find. And there was some other surprises along the way, right?
Yeah, the 2 surprises was there wasn't any documentation for their the registry API, so that required reading and dissecting the code to find those endpoints. And then in addition to that, it wasn't the process of package install, package publish wasn't just sort of a one-to-one relationship like it has been, like what we've seen with the other package managers. It was a more complex relationship where each one of those consisted of many endpoints.
And I guess one more question. What would you weight an issue that says investigate NuGet, for instance? Like, is that itself a heavy issue, or how long should the investigation take in a given milestone?
So in my mind, an investigation for a package manager consists of, I go and download the package manager, set it up on my system. I go through the process of, actually getting it to work and upload and download a package, which sometimes it might be much faster than others. Like for example, Ruby, I do that every day. So you don't even need to do that part of the process. But with something like NuGet, it depends on who's working with it, if they have experience with it before. And then from there, once you kind of have it working and understand how that works, digging in to find the actual endpoints that are going to be needed in order to implement the package manager, and kind of getting a feel for how complex they are. That's sort of the main indicator as to how much effort would be involved, is getting an overall feel for those endpoints.
Okay, and maybe one thing we can include too is like us going through the issue itself, because I noticed like those issues are pretty long when I write them, because I'm trying to be verbose. Maybe it could be like us just reviewing it and making sure that I understood that what I'm writing is clear and that makes sense and things like that too.
Yeah, that's definitely something that could help.
So maybe we won't plan the actual NuGet. This is not retrospective talk. I'm sorry. I'm just going to finish it. Sorry. Maybe we don't plan the actual issue for 12.5, but maybe we'll plan the investigation. And if we can keep that light, maybe that's okay. And then the implementation we could plan for 12.6 and 12.7.
I think that's a good idea. I think there would be a lot more confidence coming into it if we have taken the time to set it up and to see what's involved.
Okay, thanks.
And one thing that I just want to be very careful to call out here is as we're iterating around this process, to be very careful that we are sort of looking at it as an opportunity to improve. And so if we don't see any improvement by having an investigation issue and we're still running into problems, we need to try something else. So let's not get hung up on using a certain process if we're not seeing results from it. I think it's really important to remember that the intention here is to improve our results and, efficiency, etc. We all know what the values page says, but like those things are really important. And if we're expending energy and we're not seeing a good result, let's not spend the energy and figure out where else we can spend it to improve it. I
did just want to call out real quick, if we have the opportunity for an investigation for a new package manager, I'd love to partner with that. And see about our users and how they use the package manager. I think for NuGet is the one that had to feed really actually solved most of the users' problems. So if we can pair in that investigation, we could also have our users feedback to be able to say like, this is really what an MVC looks like. It's just a feed of the packages they're uploading. And so we can like check off a box in one milestone. I doubt that'll happen every time, but that would be something that we could pair together to make sure we're being efficient.
Yeah, and just a word of caution on that. That's definitely what people were saying in the issue, but there might be a difference between like what our enterprise customers want and what some of the users and the issues want. But I do think the feed is a great idea for an MVC, and maybe a great idea for us to get those features into core versus having them in premium. Maybe there's a difference between the core integration is free and it's just a feed. The enterprise integration is, anyway, now I'm talking about features again, sorry. Agreed, but we should, for 12.5, I will open up an issue. Instead of the implementation of NuGet, it'll be the investigation, and we could schedule some more user research for NuGet too.
Cool. And I think just to like kind of summarize my end is like the investigation is to give at least me as a backend engineer a technical understanding of what is happening inside of the package manager. Like for example, the NuGet feed, that's a very abstract idea to me. I don't really know what that means. So I have no way of knowing what that takes from a technical standpoint until I kind of take a look at what is actually happening that makes that work. So that's kind of all that the investigation is really supposed to give is a technical understanding of what's going on.
Speaking about investigation, would it make sense to like pack few investigation together and discover that maybe two package manager are much more simpler than another one so that they can be achieved together? Since we are starting this investigation process, maybe it helps planning if we know beforehand the general complexity of all the interesting one.
Yeah, that's something I've considered. And I think actually this is something that like Nick and I talked about like briefly was that like we don't necessarily know a lot about these package managers, but like the overall sense is that something like Conan and NuGet are probably way more complex than like Ruby and Python, just because they're older and more verbose and there's a lot more going on in those ecosystems. So yeah, it is kind of like I wonder if it would be, easier to implement certain ones than other ones. And is it worth that investigation just to identify even that to help identify when and where they should be scheduled?
All right. I apologize, peeps, but we're coming up on time pretty quick here. So I think this is, thanks, Ian. Me too. The comment was, hopes I feel better soon. I do too. I think it might be worth having a particular discussion around this process, and a good form for that might actually be when we start working on it. I think the action item here is to say, let's create an investigation issue for NuGet. As that investigation starts, it sounds like Ian has some contributions there that could be really helpful during that investigation process. So why don't you three sort of figure out how you're going to do that? Given that Steve's about to go on some vacation, it may need to wait for a minute. But and much deserved, by the way. So let's focus on that. Tim, do you want to run with that? Yeah, and just add an action item for that so that we record what we're going to do there. The next item was, if there's a large issue weight, there should be a discussion. This is Steve's on what it means, or whether or not we can confidently estimate the effort involved. Our weighting program intended to show that it was more than 5. We should add an investigation issue prior. I think that was my intent. I don't know if I put that actually on the handbook page that we have. I think that's fair. I think if you are finding that a 5 will take more than a milestone, then we basically shouldn't be estimating it as a 5. That's kind of how I see it, because otherwise, it seems weird to me. It ought to be broken up at that point, right? So that would be my suggestion. That's strange. Nico calls out, I'm just getting through these quickly just so they're recorded here. In my experience, very large issues are estimatable only when it is known territory. And I kind of agree with that. So that's where an investigation or breaking that issue up, and breaking an issue up could mean the first part of that work is investigating. Thank you. And that should be in action items, which it is. And then Tim and I this is Ian, find a good way to coordinate validation and research issues. And Tim's adding open NuGet investigation research issue for 12.5. I didn't really want to rush through the end of this, but we're out of time. Do people find this process useful? Cool. All right. I am happy to take feedback on whether we need to schedule this for longer. This is the first one we're doing here. I would like to see, for every action item, I would like to see an issue created. And if I need to create it, I'll create it, but let's create an issue, and it can be in our team project so that like it's for us to discuss if we want, but the output of a team issue should be a change to our handbook page. Does that make sense to people? I think the one thing that didn't get called out here is that we had a milestone with too much work in it, is kind of my sense. And I think that falls to me somewhat to represent better what the team's capable of. And yeah, we're still learning and we're all quite new, so like fair enough, but I just want to try to do a better job of that. Sometimes that's hard to do when we're all learning each other's capabilities and people are onboarding and everything. So if at any point anyone feels like we're overcommitting in a milestone, please ping me, ping Tim. Neither Tim nor I want to put too much in a milestone to make people feel like that they can't succeed. So I'm speaking for you, Tim, but I know that to be true. Well, it has to be true. But let's remember that that's actually the goal here. And if we know we're going to fail, that's not a nice feeling. Yes, GitLab has a 70-30 rule, but you know, I want to be a little bit more accurate about what we're putting in a milestone. Cool. I'm good. Does anyone have any final comments they'd like to make? Nope. Well, I think we are good, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day for whatever that is left.
Yeah. See you later.
See you, peeps. Thank you.